Y'all know what's going on. It's time for another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and welcome to the show, y'all. Today I'm going to be answering a few questions from my pen pal at the school in Utah. And I hope that, the way that I answer these questions is helpful to any and everybody that's listening. It gives you insight into, the things that go on and the way we think and how some of the people that work in the prisons think. And I'm excited to answer the questions that I have, like I always am, but these particular questions that I have are focused on the podcast and how it came about. So I'm grateful to Ms. Kimberly for asking me these questions, and I look forward to any and all questions that may come my way. I appreciate that. Now, look, the first question, let me read this to you. She says she has a behind-the-scenes question, if that's okay. And she asked me, what gave you the idea to start the podcast? Well, it's a good question, and I'm going to have to go back a little bit in time. I was at another facility, actually, and the idea came to me to start the podcast. I was doing wrong at that time, okay? I had a cell phone back in the day, and I was reading, a lot of people think because you got a cell phone, you're always doing something, you ain't got no business, this and that. I was always trying to figure out how to stay connected to the world and what was going on out there. I was thirsty for it, so I spent a lot of time on the device trying to see what was going on. So I read about this thing called a podcast. This was back in, I think, 2011 or 12. I was at Northeast. But anyway, when I was on the phone, I was reading about a podcast. And it just fascinated me. I'm like, what is this? It sounds like a radio show. And then I continued to read, and I got to thinking, like, man, I've always wanted to do that anyway. When I was younger, I used to listen to this radio station called WDBL in Springfield, and it had this DJ on the name Jerry Tyler. And I thought this dude was the coolest dude, you know what I'm saying? He was on the radio talking, and he was a black man. And that really captivated me, and I went to school with his son, but his son was a little different, you know what I mean? I kicked it with him and all this and that, right? But anyway, I've always wanted my own radio show. And when I read that, I'm like, this is it. So I went on there and I opened up an account and I did this and that. I can't even remember the platform that it was. But it didn't work. It did not work. And I wasn't able to do anything, so I just abandoned the idea. So I got transferred to 2 different places. I didn't have a phone anymore, all of this kind of stuff, right? But I never let that thought leave my mind. So when I got to this facility, I remember one day talking to this man. He was a counselor here, and very, very intelligent guy. I respected him a lot, and he always kept us encouraged, right? So I said, when I was talking to him, I said, Mr. Burton, I said, man, you know anything about podcasts? And he was telling me, yeah, I've heard of them and all this and that. And he's like, wow. I said, man, I would like to have one. He said, that's a great idea. And I said, what do I have to do that? So I wrote up this proposal. He told me to write up a proposal. I wrote up this proposal, and he said he would take it to the warden for me. So I wrote up this proposal. I got it typed. I had to pay somebody to get it typed, because I didn't want to handwritten. I wanted it to look professional and all of this. So I gave it to him, and he turned it in to the warden. And at this particular time, you got to go through the chain of command. So he had given it to the warden of treatment. Right, we got different levels. We got a warden of security, warden of treatment, then we got the top boss, you know what I'm saying? The head warden, right? So he gave it to the warden of treatment. And at that time, the warden of treatment was a warden named Mitchell. I had known him since the very beginning of his corrections career. I remember the first day he came to work in the prison at another prison that I was at. It's early on in my incarceration. So I'm like, yeah. He gonna see, that this is something positive. He gonna give me a good recommendation. So one day go by, 2 days go by, nothing. So I seen him in the pod one day walking around. They do inspections and stuff. So I like, Warden Mitchell, I said, when you finish with the inspection, could I talk to you? He was like, yeah, sure, no problem. So when they finished, I went over to him and I told him, I said, did you get my proposal about the podcast? He said, yeah, I got that, you know what I mean? And he said, what is a podcast? I said, you know what a podcast is, man. And I explained it to him. He was like, oh, yeah. Trying to, a lot of times when you ask people in corrections, particularly in my experience anyway, in here about something, they want to ask you, what is that? To make sure, I guess, you know what you're talking about, or just to try to see if you're serious about what it is, right? So I broke everything down to him. And he said, yeah, I talked to the warden about this. 1 day go by, 2 days go by, nothing. Another week goes by. I talked to him again. He said he handed it off to the warden. I said, dang. I said, man, I started to get discouraged about it. So it was on a Wednesday. After about 3 weeks, I get my information request back in the mail. And the warden had said, no, turned it down. Not a good time. But he had a Post-it note on it. I'll never forget this. A little yellow Post-it that was stuck to the outside of it. And they said, this the head warden. And he may not even remember this. May not even remember me. He said, good idea, but not at this time. And I was like, just upset by that. I was excited, encouraged, but upset at the same time. He's telling me it's a good idea, but he ain't saying no. So another few years goes by. And my son gets out of prison. He gets out of prison. And I was talking to him one day on the phone. I had called him and he said, and I was telling him, man, let's start a podcast together. And he thought it was a great idea. And as we were laying the foundation, it was obvious that I wanted to go in another direction. He wanted to go in the opposite. And I was like, well, this is not a good idea for me and you to do this together. You know what I'm saying, right now? And we stopped working on it. Then COVID hit. He had already started doing his shows on YouTube and I think Instagram and all this and that, right? So when COVID hit, let me back up. Before COVID, I had locked it in my head, I'm doing this. I am going to do this, but I'm going to need some money, right? I didn't know how much it was going to cost and all this, so I was just saving my money. I was going without stuff, and it was really embarrassing at the time, but I can talk about it now. I mean, I had boxes of crackers on my shelf that didn't have any food in them. I didn't want people to think I was broke. I had this reputation that I thought meant something that I always would have and all this and that. That's back when I was hustling, getting money and all this and that. So I didn't want people to think I was broke, but I had stuff on my shelf that was empty, boxes on my shelf that was empty because I was saving money to start a podcast. I had no idea. I had no idea that, I could do it for free. So when COVID hit, I happened to call home. And right at that time, we had gotten our COVID checks. And I was excited. I got $1,200. I got money. You know what I mean? And I was talking to my niece, Deanne. She's a law student right now down in Florida State. And I was telling her about my idea. And she said, Uncle Joe, you can do that. It won't cost you nothing. I'm like, how am I going to do that and it won't cost me? She said, I can get you an account on Anchor. She said, just give me your information. I gave her my information. She wrote it down. I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be about a week or so, whatever. So I forgot to tell her something, So I called her back about an hour later when I was able to get the phone because you got to wait till other people finish using it. And I said, look, D, I need to tell you something. She said, oh, Uncle Joe, by the way, your podcast is ready. You just got to call home and get some episodes and we'll record them and put them up. I'm like, huh? I freaked out. I freaked all the way out. I was just so nervous. I'm like, it's already up. She was like, yeah. I said, what you name it? And I told her what I wanted to name. I'm doing time with Joe. But I'm so excited. I said, what you name it? She said, I named it what you wanted me to name it. And I'm like, oh my God, it's up. So I told her thank you and all this and that. And she just told me, when you call home, I'm going to record you. Or you can have, your girlfriend record you or whatever. And then we'll upload them to the platform. I'm like, okay. So now I get off the phone and I'm talking to my seller and I'm telling him all the different things. And he's like, man, just talk about your experiences. Talk about what you've been through and you're going to be fine. So the first time I sit down, I practice in here. That's what I do with all my episodes, y'all. I practice in here first. Then I get on the phone and I call and I go through my little spiel and then they record it, right? But I remember being in here and I was practicing the first episode, what I wanted to talk about, And I was so nervous my throat just choked up. I couldn't get the words out. And a friend of mine said, Joe, he said, look, forget all that. Because I was reading off a piece of paper. He said, forget all that. He said, man, you just need to go in like you do when you're sitting around talking and everybody's asking you questions about the penitentiary. Just be you. So I tore up the paper, and after about 3 more rehearsal episodes, I got it. I got this. So I called home and I recorded my first episode a few weeks after that. And then I decided, I said, man, I want to try to get it, a website and all these other types of things and stuff like that. But I didn't need it. Anchor was free. I was able to do it for free. And that was it, really. I just record in here. Not in here. I record myself in here and I practice. And then I get on the phone and then I have them, they upload the episode. And as far as the prison officials, I remember how that came about. They heard me talking about it all the time, and I had made my request, but they didn't know that I had actually started doing it. Not all of them, but a few of them did, because I had people here listening. And I remember one day they had a lot of people out here at the facility with a job fair, and they needed somebody to speak during one of the downtimes, the breaks. So they came to get me and said, talk about what you want to do when you get out and all this and that. So they brought me out there, and I'm in front of like 50 or 60 people. And these are free world people, and people with halfway houses, jobs, all the resources that you have lined up for the future for inmates. And I'm standing out here, and I'm talking in front of them, and I am nervous as can be, because I had never done this before, spoken in front of anybody, particularly about something that I was doing, like a podcast, right? I'd always done stuff, off and on, that was crooked. And now I'm standing out in front of all of these people, and I'm giving this speech about, what it is that I'm doing. And I remember one of the people in the audience, she was a lady that was over a halfway house. She said, what's the name of your show again? I said, Doing Time with Joe. I said, you just Google it. And I didn't even really know how Google worked and all this. I'm just talking like I am. You know what I'm saying? Like I really knew what was going on. And I said, just Google it and it'll pop up, and then you're going to see these prison bars. That used to be my logo, prison bars, before I got to what you see on it now. I said, you're going to see these prison bars, and I said, you just click on it and it'll start to play. And she pulled it up. She said, oh, I get it. I see it right here. But I didn't realize that it was a lady behind me that worked for Tennessee Department of Corrections, and she was sitting behind me, and she said something to one of the guys that worked there. She said, do y'all know anything about this? And I can hear her. So I'm knowing that I got some questions coming. So when I finished giving my speech, she said, inmate. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, may I ask you a question? I'm like, sure. She said, how do you do this? I said, I call home, my family records me, and that's it. They put it up, She said, oh, that's fantastic. Like that, right? And the officer that was standing there, he's not really listening to what I'm saying, but he's one of the people that had heard about the podcast, but he really hadn't been listening to me. And he said, no, he ain't got no podcast now. He's going to do it when he gets out. And she said, no, I'm looking at it right now. And then she hit play. And I could see when she pressed play on the phone, and I almost started crying right then and there in front of everybody, because I actually saw it. Actually saw my podcast. You know what I mean? And it started to play, and it was my voice. It sounds silly, but I heard myself on the computer, on the internet, whatever you want to call that, right? And he's standing there looking, and I'm like, wow. And I leaned closer to her, and she couldn't really let me look at the phone, but she let her hand hang a little bit, and I just stood there for a few seconds, and I thought, this is the greatest thing. I felt the joy that I hadn't felt in years. It made me feel like somebody. And from that point on, I was on fire. I was doing, I call it off, getting on my girl's nerve, with ideas of this, doing this and that. And I continued to crank out shows. At first, I was cranking them out once a week. I hired this lady called Anna East Lucille. She's an actress, a real actress. And she was my co-host for all of my early episodes during COVID, trying to get a little extra money. And it wasn't but $20 that I could pay her per episode. I was using my COVID money to do that until she started to go back to work as an actress. She did that and really didn't need my money. She just believed in what I was doing. And nobody ever told me what I should say, what I shouldn't say. I didn't want my podcast to be like a whistleblower podcast, talking about, the stuff that I perceive or inmates perceive as illegal and all this that going on in the prison, and I just wanted to talk about things that would discourage other people from following in my footsteps and the other people in here. I don't want people in here. I want people to get it. You shouldn't have to come to prison to get it. And when I say get it, I mean understand your worth. And think about things that don't hurt people, don't hurt yourself. I want people to understand that. And I believe that by telling true stories, honest stories, gritty stories, that people will get that, you know? And that's how I got started. And that's the story behind it and all of that kind of stuff, right? So let me read another question that she has. She says, our class has discussed the need for prison reform a lot this semester. Do you feel like the treatment and quality of life of prisoners has improved since you first came to prison, or are things about the same? Well, it depends on what prison you're in. It depends on what prison you're in. At this facility that I'm at, you don't have as many problems as you do at some of the other places. It's not that this facility has more to do. The vast majority of people at this prison just don't want to be involved in that lifestyle anymore. I know a lot of people that work at this facility would probably want to take credit for that and all this and that, but it's not the case. And I'm not trying to be mean towards anybody. I'm not trying to be disrespectful towards anybody that works at any facility or this facility. But the majority of people here, they are just tired of the criminal lifestyle. Tired of it. And they just want to be in an environment where they feel safe. But what we've come to understand is that our safety is not incumbent on the people that are here to supervise us. Our safety depends on us. And what I mean by that is we don't mistreat each other, right? And get caught up in situations that, you know, if you believed in the old ways, that would cause you to have to hurt somebody or take something from somebody. The majority of people here just don't buy into that idea no more. And it has nothing to do with the people necessarily that run the facility. But I will say this. They set up guardrails, structure that make it easy for you to stay out of the way. You know, they're constantly reminding you to the point where it gets on your nerves sometimes, don't do this, don't do that. Sometimes it's almost like raising a kid, you know, the way they treat us. But I understand why they do that to the extent that you have a lot of younger people in here and you have to do that. But at some of these other facilities, oh, it's terrible. It's even worse than it was back in the day when I first came in. Because people don't have hope. And I know that, you know, that's something that a lot of people that want to be tough on crime and all this don't get. They don't get that. When you give these 100% sentences out, when you have these rules that expect you to work and don't show you the benefit of work and all this and that, and that's it. And when you have these people that don't respect the humanity in another individual, when you have people that don't understand what empathy is, you understand? When you have people that believe that you are here to be punished beyond your separation from society, it makes it hard for people that are hurting, that have committed some of the most horrendous crimes, to see the worth in what they're doing. It makes it hard. So they lash out at each other, they lash out at the people that are in charge of the prisons and all of those types of things. It's not a difficult task to convince people that it is to your benefit to follow the rules and do all the things that you need to do to make your life better, even if you're never getting out. The key ingredient to all of that is empathy. You can care about how another individual conducts their life without being seen as somebody that cares about another human being, but not necessarily caring about an inmate. See, that's the problem. That if you care about another human being that happens to be an inmate, you're on the wrong side of everything now. And that's insane to me. And that's why it makes it so hard for people to get why they should follow the rules in here. I hope that what I've said to you helps in that regard. And then she asked me, she said, what are some changes that would improve the circumstances for those in prison? We have to have, in my opinion, programs for the staff that will allow them to care, that will allow them to care in a professional way and a personal way that doesn't cross the line. You have to learn to trust the people that work in prisons more than in a stringent way. And in addition to that, we have to have programs or jobs that will allow us to work and earn a living, a minimum wage that is comparable to what the minimum wage is on the streets. You have to allow people to be able to participate and contribute in a way that we don't right now. Like I say, when I heard my podcast for the first time, I was mesmerized. And I think more so because I had been cut off from the world, you know what I'm saying, other than when I was doing wrong. I shouldn't have to do wrong to be in touch with the world. No, shouldn't have to. Well, that's enough of that, y'all. I've answered all the questions Miss Kimberly asked me, and I really appreciate, you know what I'm saying, any questions that she has or anybody in the class has or anybody out there that may have for me. Okay? If you do, hit me up at doingtimewithjoe@gmail.com. My girl, she'll get all of that to me, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. This has been another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and I say peace, y'all. I'm getting